Today, I'm going to tell you about a little-known episode in the life of Pablo Escobar, the day he was publicly rejected by a woman from the elite. Sofia Herrera, a descendant of a powerful coffee dynasty, humiliated the country's most feared drug lord without hesitation, right in front of Medellin's aristocracy. But Escobar's reaction wasn't impulsive. It was calculated and forceful, marking a turning point in Colombia's power dynamics. Help me reach 200 likes on this video so I can keep bringing you these hidden stories from our country that were never taught in school. The signature humidity of Medellin grew heavier under the February sun in 1984 as the palms of the exclusive country club swayed gently in the evening breeze. It was one of those days when the heat clings to your body like a second skin, and the wealthiest families sought refuge among the luxuries of Antioquia's most prestigious social club. From the restaurant terrace, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria observed the scene with a glass of Johnny Walker Blue Label whiskey in hand. His dark, inquisitive eyes scanned the surroundings with the same obsession he once had for reading his National Geographic Wildlife Encyclopedia back at Hacienda Napoles. At 35, he looked impeccable in a white linen suit, polished Italian shoes that gleamed under the twilight, and a Rolex Submariner, reflecting his recent inclusion on Forbes' list of the world's richest men. "Are you sure you want to stay Patron?" murmured Gustavo Gaviria, his cousin and trusted confidant, nervously adjusting his silk tie. Despite the air conditioning, sweat trickled down his forehead. "You know how these blue blood families are. They've never accepted us." Pablo took a slow sip from his drink, letting the flavor linger on his tongue as he observed the tables filled with Medellin's oldest bloodlines. Women in designer gowns chatted in hushed tones, their jewelry sparkling under the soft lighting. Gray-haired gentlemen lit imported cigars while discussing textile and coffee deals. It was a closed circle Pablo had long sought to infiltrate, a society with invisible gates for those not born within its ranks. "Gustavo, my brother," he said in his calm but resolute voice, the one so many already feared, "I've built an empire that moves over $400 million a week. I'm wealthier than all these gentlemen combined, and they still look at me like I'm the kid who used to sell contraband cigarettes in Envigado." The jazz quartet played soft, sophisticated music, but Pablo could still feel the tension in the air, the whispers that ceased when he passed by, the fake laughter whenever he drew near. It was as if he wore an invisible mark on his forehead. From his vantage point, Pablo had his eyes on one woman in particular, Sofia Herrera Mendoza, one of Medellin's most prominent heiresses, with vast coffee estates in Colombia's coffee-growing region. She had a timeless beauty, her hair styled in an elegant chignon, skin as pale as porcelain, a sign of generations untouched by hard labor, and a posture that radiated confidence, like someone who had always known she belonged to the world of the chosen. Sofia laughed among a group of friends near the lit-up pool. Her laughter rose above the murmurs, and Pablo noticed how the men at the club secretly admired her. Her pearl silk dress flowed with grace, and the emeralds she wore were worth more than what many families earned in a lifetime. "Look at her, Gustavo," Pablo said, discreetly pointing. "She's got class, style, the kind of woman who should be by my side at international events." Gustavo followed his gaze and sighed. He knew that expression on his cousin's face well. It was the same look he had when he wanted a new exotic beast for his personal zoo or a new drug route. For Pablo Escobar, the word impossible didn't exist. Patron, with all due respect, that's Sofia Herrera. Her family has been part of high society for generations. Her grandfather was an ambassador. Her father controls much of the coffee shipped to Europe. They don't see us as their equals. Pablo set his glass down on the table with composure. His eyes turned colder, but his voice remained calm and steady. "Have you forgotten what happened to Minister Lara when he tried to humiliate me? Or what happened when M19 messed with the Ochoas?" He leaned forward, speaking in an icy whisper. "No one, and I mean no one, tells me something can't be done, especially not when it comes to a woman." The night's temperature seemed to rise as Pablo stood, adjusting his jacket with deliberate movements. His philosophy was simple. Everything had a price, and there was no fortress that couldn't be taken with the right resources and determination. That world of illustrious surnames was the last stronghold left to conquer. But tonight, that was about to change. He walked confidently toward where Sophia was standing, the sound of his shoes echoing softly on the polished marble floor. With every step, the atmosphere grew quieter, as if the very air was holding its breath. The waiters tensed. Guests straightened their posture, and a silent wave of expectation rippled through the area. Sophia had her back turned when Pablo approached the group. They were discussing the upcoming charity event organized by the Society of St. Vincent Delaware Paul. Her voice was melodic, marked by that refined Paisa accent typical of the most exclusive circles. "Ladies," Pablo said with a flawlessly practiced smile, "forgive me for the interruption." They all turned to him, and he noticed immediate recognition in their expressions. Some turned pale, others exchanged glances, but all maintained the cold courtesy instilled in them since childhood. Sophia stared at him, and Pablo felt a chill run down his spine. Her green eyes, matching the color of her earrings, were as icy as the glaciers of the Andes. There was no surprise, no interest, no fear, only absolute indifference. "Miss Herrera," he said, extending his hand, "I'm Pablo Escobar. I've been watching you this evening and couldn't resist a chance to meet the most beautiful woman in Medellin." Sophia looked at his hand as if it were something repulsive. Her friends remained motionless, fully aware that they were witnessing something significant. The silence stretched, growing unbearable. At last, Sophia replied, her voice clear and firm. "Mr. Escobar," she said with disdain, "I appreciate your courtesy, but I'm currently spending time with my friends." She didn't return the handshake. No smile, not even the minimal gesture of politeness usually granted to a rival in public. She simply turned around and resumed the conversation. As if Pablo Escobar didn't exist, time seemed to freeze. Pablo felt as though he had been slapped across the face, but he didn't let it show. He kept his hand extended for one more second before lowering it calmly. His smile lingered, but his eyes betrayed a shift. "Of course," he murmured with a slight nod. "Have a lovely evening, ladies." He walked away with the same dignity with which he had arrived, though now each step carried a different weight. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. Everyone had seen it. Pablo Escobar, the man who bent the Colombian state, who made the United States tremble, had just been dismissed by a woman. Back at their table, Gustavo waited, visibly uneasy. He had known his cousin since they were boys. And he knew one thing for certain. Pablo never forgot a public humiliation. "Patron," he began, but Pablo cut him off with a gesture. "Don't say anything, cousin. Don't say a word." He downed his whiskey in one gulp, eyes locked on Sophia, who was still laughing as if nothing had happened. But he no longer looked at her with admiration. Now, something far more dangerous was taking shape behind his gaze. The night moved on, but the tension lingered in the air. Pablo pretended to relax, made small talk with Gustavo, ordered more whiskey. Yet his eyes kept returning to Sophia, analyzing her with the precision he reserved for his enemies. Close to midnight, as the guests began to leave, Pablo and Gustavo exited the club. The night air was thick with the scent of jasmine, and the chirping of crickets mingled with the distant murmur of traffic. "Gustavo," Pablo said as they walked toward his armored Mercedes, "I want you to find out everything about Sophia Herrera. Absolutely everything. Where she lives, what she does, who she sees, what time she wakes up, what she eats for breakfast, what books she reads." "Are you sure, Patron? That family has ties to senators and businessmen abroad." Pablo stopped next to the car and looked at him intently. The streetlight cast hard shadows across his face. "That woman made a very big mistake. She humiliated me in front of half the city. Do you really think I'm going to let that go?" His voice was a lethal whisper. "No one, and I repeat, no one, treats Pablo Escobar like trash. Especially not some young lady who thinks her last name makes her untouchable." The driver opened the door, but Pablo didn't get in right away. He watched as the lights of the club slowly went out. He already had the outline of a plan. It wouldn't be violent, not at first. He had learned that the most effective revenge was slow, like poison that paralyzes drop by drop. "Tomorrow I want you to speak to our financial contacts," he continued. "Dig into everything about the Herrera businesses, their investments, debts, allies. Every empire has cracks. You just have to know where to look. Gustavo nodded silently, though something inside him warned that chaos was about to be unleashed. He had seen Pablo crush politicians, cartels, government officials. But this time was different. This time it was personal. Finally, Pablo got into the Mercedes. As the car glided through the city he once ruled like a king, he sat in silence, deep in thought. In recent years, the world had grown used to bowing before him. But that night, one woman dared to defy his power, and that would not go unanswered. In his mind, he could already picture the moment when she would ever come to him, perhaps not to beg, but certainly seeking his support. Visualizing that proud woman acknowledging his authority was intoxicating. "The goal is simple, brother," he murmured coldly. "That woman humiliated me in front of everyone, treated me like I was nothing. But I'm going to teach her that Pablo Escobar is not someone you ignore like just another man on the street. When I'm done with this, she'll understand exactly who she crossed and what I'm capable of." "And what if she doesn't react the way you expect?" Roberto asked. Pablo's gaze turned glacial. It was a possibility he had already considered, but one he refused to entertain openly. From his experience, everyone, without exception, eventually yielded when the right pressure was applied in the right place. Politicians bent out of fear, businessmen out of ambition, military leaders out of lust for power. But women like Sofia, with them, the strategy had to be different. "It'll work, Roberto. It always does. It's just a matter of finding her weak spot and pressing with the right amount of force. She has vulnerabilities, just like everyone else. We just need to uncover them," he said with firm resolve. The office phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Pablo picked up the receiver in his usual tone, calm yet commanding. "Speak." "It's Papel, Patron. We have an update on Miss Herrera's movements today. She'll be having lunch at Club Union at 12:30. Then she has an appointment at Banco de Bogota at exactly 2. Pablo checked his Rolex. It was 8:30, a comfortable window to initiate phase 1 of his plan. "Perfect. I want you to follow her discreetly. Keep your distance. She must suspect nothing for now. Watch who she meets, what she does, how she reacts. And get a copy of the itinerary for that meeting at the bank." "Understood, Patron." After hanging up, Pablo turned to his brothers. The machinery of his organization was already in motion, channeling all its resources toward a target that had no idea what was coming. "Gustavo, dig deep into that bank meeting. If she's looking for additional financing, that's our opening to step in. Roberto, prepare $10 million in cash. We'll need it for some strategic moves." As his brothers left the room to carry out his orders, Pablo remained alone, going over the files on Sofia Herrera. Morning sunlight flooded the room, illuminating every page of carefully gathered information. He walked over to the wall, where he kept a collection of mounted animals. A jaguar, a spectacled bear, a condor with its wings spread wide. All of them hunted on his estates, trophies from his personal expeditions. Each had been a challenge in its own way. Majestic, powerful creatures that had required cunning, strategy, and patience to bring down. Sofia would be his most difficult prey yet. He couldn't rely on the brutal tactics he used against his male adversaries. This hunt demanded subtlety, psychology, and a deep understanding of his target's desires and fears. The distant hum of helicopters signaled the arrival of his associates for the usual morning meeting. Carlos Leiter would be arriving from his island in the Bahamas with updates on Caribbean routes. The Ochoa brothers would bring reports on Pacific operations. Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha was expected with news about the agreements with armed groups. But that morning, Escobar had other priorities. What dominated his thoughts was his personal crusade, one that would test not only his capacity for retaliation, but also his ability to break through the final barrier that remained: Medellin's old aristocracy. He carefully stored the reports in a safe hidden behind a painting by Fernando Botero. As he shut the steel door with an almost imperceptible smile, he knew the hunt had already begun, and he was a patient hunter, a very patient one. Miles away, in the same city, Sofia Herrera was beginning her day, unaware that every move she made was being watched, every decision scrutinized. Every detail of her life meticulously documented by the most feared man in Colombia. The game was on, and Pablo Escobar never played to lose. If this story about the power struggle between Pablo Escobar and Medellin's elite has you hooked and you want to find out how this battle unfolds, it would be an honor to have you join our community here on YouTube. Your subscription means a lot to us, as it allows us to keep sharing fascinating and little-known stories from Colombian history. Hit like if Sophia's courage has caught you by surprise. Share it with someone who enjoys gripping and tension-filled stories, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss a single detail of what Escobar has in store for her. Now, let's see how Sophia goes through her day, unaware that she's about to come face-to-face with the most dangerous man in the country. The air conditioning system at the Bank of Bogotá, Medellin branch emitted a constant hum as Sofia Herrera reviewed the financial documents spread out on the conference table for the third time. Her hands, flawlessly manicured and painted in a pearly polish, trembled slightly as she turned the pages of the newly received report. This meeting, which she had expected to be a mere formality for renewing the family's credit line, had taken an unexpected turn. "Miss Herrera," said the manager, a balding man in his 50s with gold-rimmed glasses, adjusting his tie nervously. "As I was explaining, we've been forced to reassess our position regarding the financing of coffee farms. The board of directors in Bogotá has significantly tightened its risk assessment criteria." Sophia looked up from the papers, her green eyes reflecting both confusion and a growing sense of unease. She had been managing the family business's finances for 3 years without any issues, and this meeting was supposed to be just another routine matter. Her father, Don Alejandro, had entrusted her with full control of the financial department, and she had never failed, neither in payments nor in maintaining solid relations with the banks. "I don't understand, Mr. Munera," she said firmly. "We've been punctual for over 5 years. Never missed a single payment. Our collateral is in order, and the harvest projections are more than positive. What's behind this sudden change in terms?" The manager shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had been in the banking sector for 2 decades and could recognize when a decision came from higher up, driven by factors that never appeared on a balance sheet. That same morning, he had received a direct call from the bank's president in the capital, something that rarely happened, and certainly not for individual cases. "You see, Miss Herrera," he said cautiously, "the current economic situation is delicate. The rise of drug trafficking has created a climate of uncertainty among international investors. Our partners in the U.S. and Europe are being extremely strict with any operations linked to the Colombian market, especially those involving agricultural products." Sophia furrowed her brows slightly. She had heard these arguments before, but had always managed to prove that her operations were entirely legal. Her crops held international certifications. She had direct contracts with reputable European buyers, and all her documentation was in order. "Mr. Munera, you know perfectly well how we operate. This family has done business with this bank for over 3 decades. My grandfather helped found this very branch. Don't tell me you're suggesting that our activities have anything to do with—" No, of course not," the manager interrupted quickly. "Your family has always enjoyed an impeccable reputation. But please understand, these orders are coming from very high up. U.S. regulatory authorities have made it clear. Any bank wishing to maintain its dollar operations must act with extreme caution." At that moment, the manager's secretary entered after a soft knock at the door, wearing a worried expression. "Excuse the interruption, Mr. Munera, but Mr. Vasquez from the main office in Bogotá is on line 1. He says it's urgent." The manager's face paled slightly. Unexpected calls from Bogotá rarely brought good news, especially not in the middle of such a delicate meeting. "Miss Herrera, would you excuse me for a moment? This call may be relevant to what we're discussing." Sophia nodded, though a feeling of unease began to settle in her gut. While he spoke quietly on the phone, she turned her gaze toward the window overlooking downtown Medellin. The streets bustled with midday traffic. Street vendors peddled their goods, and the city went on, oblivious of the drama unfolding in that office, drama that would soon change her fate. The manager hung up with an even more serious expression. "Miss Herrera, I regret to inform you that things have become more complicated. "We've just received word that 3 of your main European buyers have decided to temporarily suspend their contracts with Colombian producers. It appears they're being pressured by their own financial institutions to diversify their sources of supply." Sophia felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Those contracts made up the bulk of her annual revenue. Without them, continuing to operate the farms would be practically unsustainable. "When did you receive that information?" "I just spoke with Heinrich Mueller from the German company yesterday, and he didn't mention anything." The statement came in early this morning. Apparently, it was a decision made over the weekend during emergency board meetings. What Sophia didn't know was that 3 floors above, in the same building, a man in a gray suit was monitoring every second of the meeting through surveillance cameras that had been tampered with earlier that day. Beside him, 2 other men were taking meticulous notes on every gesture, every word, every sign of stress from the woman who had dared to humiliate Pablo Escobar. "The calls to Europe were a success, boss," one of them whispered. "Our contact in Frankfurt and Amsterdam were very persuasive. We offer them Peruvian coffee at prices no Colombian producer could match." "Excellent. And the bank?" "The president got a visit last night from our friends. They reminded him of certain questionable loans made in the 80s to fictitious companies. Information the Bank of the Republic's auditors might find interesting." The man in the gray suit allowed himself a smile, a rare sight, and one few had lived to see. Carlos Letter, one of the cartel's founders and a master of psychological manipulation, had learned during his years in U.S. prisons that fear was often more effective than bullets. Meanwhile, back in the bank office, Sophia was trying to process the information. Her logical mind, trained at prestigious institutions, was racing to find a rational explanation. "Mr. Munera, don't tell me this is just a coincidence. That 3 clients made the same decision over the same weekend, and that the bank is suddenly changing its credit policies. Something's not right here." The manager discreetly wiped the sweat from his brow. He suspected it too, but didn't dare say it aloud. In 1984 Colombia, there were some truths best left unspoken. "Miss Herrera, all I can comment on are the bank's decisions. What other companies choose to do is beyond my control. So what options do we have, then?" "Well, we could consider restructuring your current debt, perhaps extending the payment terms, though that would mean higher interest rates," he said, then paused as if about to bring up something uncomfortable. Or what?" "There are certain private investors who've shown interest in the coffee sector, individuals with significant capital who might be willing to partner with established producers. It's not the most additional option, but given the exceptional circumstances." A chill ran down Sophia's spine. At that time, the so-called private investors often had connections that traditional families tried to avoid at all costs. What kind of investors? Businessmen with experience in various industries. Some of them are looking to diversify into more formal sectors. Although I understand that for your family, that kind of alliance might be problematic. Just then, the phone on the desk rang again. The manager answered in a noticeably tense tone. "Banco de Bogotá, Medellín branch." "Yes, sir. I understand. Right away." He hung up quickly and looked at Sophia with a mix of apology and resignation. "Miss Herrera, I've just been informed that I have an urgent appointment in 15 minutes. Would you mind if we reschedule for tomorrow? That way you can consult with your father and reflect on what we discussed." Sophia gathered her documents automatically. Everything had changed in barely an hour, and she needed time to sort through her thoughts. As she slipped the papers into her Italian leather briefcase, she couldn't shake the feeling that unseen forces were at play. "Yes, tomorrow at the same time is fine." "Perfect. And if you decide to explore the investor option, I know some people you could speak with discreetly. No commitments." Sophia nodded silently and left the office. As she walked through the bank's corridors, the echo of her heels rang out on the polished marble. She felt as if dozens of eyes were following her. Maybe it was paranoia, but the feeling wouldn't leave her. Stepping outside, the Medellín heat hit her hard. The February sun was relentless, and the wool suit that felt perfect in the air-conditioned office now seemed suffocating. While she waited for the chauffeur to bring around the BMW, she watched the bustle of the city with a new perspective. How many of those well-dressed men were connected to the underworld her family had always steered clear of? How many of those elegant firms had sealed deals she would never have imagined? Her phone rang. It was her father. "Sophia, how did it go at the bank?" "Dad, we need to talk. Can you come to the office this afternoon? We have a problem." As she spoke, she glanced up at the bank windows, wondering if someone might be watching her. "Yes, Dad. I think we have a serious problem." As her BMW made its way through traffic toward the family offices in El Poblado, Sophia had no idea that 3 vehicles were following her carefully. Nor did she know that her call had been intercepted by cutting-edge technology, and that every word she'd spoken was now being analyzed by experts in psychological manipulation. At Hacienda Napoles, Pablo Escobar received updates every half hour on the progress of his plan. As he fed shrimp to his pink flamingos, a ritual that often helped her relax when orchestrating something big, he listened with satisfaction as his network of contacts began tightening the net around their target. "Patron, the first step went flawlessly," reported Gustavo. "She's confused, uneasy, but still has no idea who's behind it all. The next few days will be crucial." Pablo smiled, watching the majestic birds devour crustaceans. He was fascinated by how such beautiful creatures could display such ferocity when feeding. "Tomorrow we begin the second phase. I want our friends at the Ministry of Agriculture to make an unannounced visit to the Herrera plantations. A routine quality inspection for export. Make sure they find a few minor irregularities. Nothing serious, just enough to delay the next shipments. And if she tries to get help from another bank, she won't. She still has pride. She still believes she can handle this on her own. But each day, each setback, will slowly erode that confidence. By Friday, she'll be desperate." In her office in El Poblado, Sophia was getting ready to explain to her father a situation she herself didn't fully understand. Don Alejandro Herrera, 65 years old and with decades of experience in the coffee business, had faced many crises, but none as well-coordinated as this. "This isn't normal, daughter," he murmured while reviewing the bank documents. "In half a century in this business, I've never seen 3 European buyers make the same decision at the same time. And now, problems with the bank, too. What do you think is going on, Dad?" Don Alejandro remained silent for several seconds, his gaze fixed on the mountains surrounding Medellin. His experience had taught him that in Colombia, when things started to fail in such a precise and consecutive manner, it was rarely a coincidence. Almost always, there was a mind behind the scenes pulling the strings. "Sophia, I want you to think carefully. Have you had any trouble with anyone lately? Any business disagreements or personal issues?" Sophia mentally reviewed the past few months. Her relationships with her partners were stable. She hadn't had conflicts with employees or competitors. Personally, everything seemed calm. And then she remembered that encounter at the country club 3 nights ago. That man who had approached her with unsettling confidence, the way she had deliberately ignored him, and the looks that followed for the rest of the evening. But it seemed absurd to think a social slight could trigger such a sophisticated economic retaliation. Imagining Pablo Escobar behind something like that felt more like fiction than reality. "No, Dad, nothing comes to mind." Yet, as she said those words, an unease settled within her, a doubt that, in the days to come, she would refuse to accept until the truth became undeniable. The sun was beginning to set behind the Medellin mountains, painting the sky in warm shades of purple and orange. In those same mountains, clandestine labs operated nonstop, fueling the power of a man capable of altering destinies, buying loyalty, or destroying lives as easily as he fed his exotic animals. And from the heart of that empire, Pablo Escobar calmly plotted his next move in a game where he was the only one who knew all the rules. Can you believe how precise Pablo is in carrying out his revenge? Every step carefully calculated to trap Sophia, without her even suspecting where the blow is coming from. If this story has you hooked, it would be a great honor to have you join our YouTube community. Your support makes it possible for us to keep sharing stories like this. Hit like if you think Sophia is starting to connect the dots. Subscribe to find out how this power game unfolds, and share this video with anyone who loves psychological suspense. Now let's see what happens when Pablo decides to raise the stakes, and Sophia begins to discover who she's really up against. On Friday afternoon, exactly 7 days after that night at the country club, Sophia Herrera was going through the most difficult moment of her career. In her office in El Poblado, surrounded by papers and figures that seemed to scream out her desperation, she gazed through the window at the sunset, casting a melancholic golden glow over the city. The mountains that had once brought her comfort now seemed to close in around her, as if the very landscape were pressing down on her. The week had been a string of perfectly timed blows. On Monday, officials from the Ministry of Agriculture claimed to find minor irregularities in her crops, something that had never happened before. On Tuesday, 2 of her most loyal employees resigned, saying they had received offers from completely unknown companies. On Wednesday, an unexpected fire tore through part of her warehouse in Fredonia. On Thursday came the official notice. The last 2 European buyers were suspending their contracts. "Miss Herrera," said Marta, her secretary, entering with a serious expression, "there's a gentleman who says he has a proposal you might be interested in. He didn't give his name, but insists it's important that you hear him out." Sophia looked up from the financial reports she had already reviewed 1,000 times. The numbers were clear. Without the international deals and with the extra expenses in the past few days, bankruptcy would be inevitable in less than 3 months. "What does this man look like?" "Older, elegant, very well dressed." He said he represents an investor interested in the coffee business. He arrived in a black Mercedes with tinted windows. A chill ran through Sophia. All week long, she had felt as if invisible forces were pulling the strings of her life. Everything was happening with too much precision to be mere coincidence. Still, she had no proof, only a growing intuition clouding her judgment. Send him in. The man who walked in was exactly as Marta had described. Older, distinguished, dressed in an impeccable Italian suit, with an air of refined courtesy. But in his eyes there was something different, a coldness that clashed with his polite smile and immediately put Sophia on alert. "Miss Herrera, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Alvaro Montoya. I represent a businessman who has followed your family's work in the coffee industry with great interest. Mr. Montoya, I'd appreciate it if you got straight to the point. It's been a complicated week, and I don't have time for formalities." The man smiled, but that smile made Sophia feel as if she were being sized up like prey by a predator. "I understand. My client is prepared to immediately absorb the contracts that were canceled, pay 30% more than the European buyers offered, and invest the capital needed to modernize your operations." Sophia felt like a lifeline was being thrown to her in the middle of a shipwreck. It was the perfect solution at the exact moment she needed it most. Maybe too perfect. What are the conditions? Very simple. He only asks that you meet him personally to discuss the details. A private dinner tonight, at a location of your choosing. It will be completely safe. And I can't know who he is before going? Unfortunately, no. My client values confidentiality greatly, especially in financial matters. But I assure you, he is a serious man with genuine intentions of forming a mutually beneficial alliance. Sophia leaned back in her chair, weighing the offer. Every fiber of her being warned her was a trap, but the numbers on her desk were even crueler. She had no viable alternatives left. Her pride had kept her from accepting private investment offers for days, but now she was at the edge of collapse. "If I agree, how can I be sure I'll be safe? My client is a gentleman, Miss Herrera. He would never disrespect a lady of your stature. And besides, you can choose the place and the conditions. Everything will be on your terms." Marta entered again, this time with urgency written all over her face. "Miss, your father is on line 1. He says it's extremely urgent." Sophia picked up the phone, briefly apologizing to Montoya. "Dad." "Sophia, you have to come to the estate right now. We just got a notice from the bank. They're planning to enforce the collateral next week. They say we're at risk of default." Sophia's heart stopped for a moment. Losing the collateral meant losing the plantations and the family home, which had belonged to the Herreras for 4 generations. "Dad, that can't be. We paid everything on time." "Not anymore, sweetheart. There was a system error. and the last payment wasn't processed. We tried to fix it, but they told us our account has already been flagged as high risk. Sophia looked at the man sitting in front of her, who watched her patiently, as if he already knew exactly what was about to happen. And in that instant, everything clicked. Every incident, every setback, every coincidence had been perfectly calculated to corner her. "Dad, I'll call you back in 5 minutes." She hung up and looked Montoya straight in the eye with newfound determination. "Who is your client, really?" The man's smile changed. This time it was genuine, like he could finally stop pretending. "I think you already know the answer, Miss Herrera. He's someone who never forgets being humiliated, but who knows how to recognize intelligence and courage when he sees it. Pablo Escobar, the man himself. And I must tell you," Montoya continued, "your behavior this week has left him deeply impressed. Anyone else would have crumbled by the second day, but you've shown admirable strength." Sophia rose from her chair and walked over to the window. Her mind was racing, trying to absorb the magnitude of what she had just discovered. Pablo Escobar, the most feared and powerful man in Colombia, had orchestrated the systematic downfall of her company as retaliation for a mere social slight. Was all this because she refused to shake his hand at the country club? "Miss Herrera," Montoya added, "you expose him publicly in a circle where he's not used to being ignored. But more than that, you showed him there are still people in this country who believe they can live outside his shadow. That's something he refuses to tolerate. And now what does he expect from me? An apology? That I kneel before him?" Montoya joined her at the window. "None of that. Don Pablo now values you more than before. The way you handled the pressure confirmed what he already suspected, that you're a smart, determined woman with character. Exactly the kind of person who should be by his side. Are you suggesting this is an invitation?" "Exactly. Don Pablo wishes to share a dinner with you tonight, not as a creditor demanding repayment, but as a man intrigued by a woman who had completely captured his attention." Sophia turned sharply, her eyes blazing with a mix of fury and disbelief. "Are you serious? After ruining my company, putting my family in jeopardy, and destroying my life in a single week, he expects me to sit down and dine with him like it's some ordinary date?" "What he expects," Montoya replied calmly, "is that you understand the situation. Pablo Escobar is offering you the chance to get everything back. Your business, your estate, your future. All you need to do is accept his invitation. And if I refuse?" Montoya fell silent, but his expression spoke louder than any words. "Don Pablo isn't used to things not going according to plan. The choice is yours. You can join the solution or remain part of the problem." Sophia returned slowly to her desk and sat down. Her calculating mind was running through every possible scenario, searching for escape routes. Any option that would let her save both her legacy and her integrity. But no matter how many alternatives she considered, they all led to the same place. Escobar held every card. If I agree to this dinner, how do I know he'll keep his word? Don Pablo never breaks a pact. He has many reputations, but betraying an agreement is not one of them. If he says he'll do something, he does it. Sophia gave one last glance at the reports on her desk. The numbers hadn't changed. Without outside help, they would lose everything in a matter of weeks. Years of effort, generations of tradition, gone, all for the crime of having had the courage to ignore a criminal. But in the midst of despair, she realized something else. Escobar had invested time, money, and effort into crafting this entire scenario. This wasn't just revenge. There was more to it. He had seen something in her that intrigued him enough to turn her into his obsession. Where would the dinner be? At Hacienda Napoles. Don Pablo wants to show you his world, let you see his surroundings. At 7 o'clock this evening, a helicopter will come for you. Hacienda Napoles, his personal domain. You'll be treated as the special guest you are. Sophia made a decision she knew would change her destiny forever. It didn't come solely from desperation, but from the clear recognition that Escobar had already won this game from the beginning. I'll accept. Montoya smiled, satisfied. Perfect. The helicopter will be waiting at the Intercontinental Hotel helipad at exactly 7. Don Pablo is eager to get to know you better. Miss Herrera, When Montoya left, Sophia remained in her office as the city began to light up with the colors of sunset. She picked up the phone to call her father and explain everything, but before dialing, she paused. In just 1 week, Pablo Escobar had proven he could dismantle a business empire as easily as others do their grocery shopping. His ability to execute a plan with precision, resources, and patience surpassed even the legends whispered about him in Medellin's most elite circles. And the most shocking part wasn't his cruelty. It was that all of this power, this display of control, wasn't random. He was genuinely interested in her. A man like him wouldn't go to such lengths to impress someone unless that person meant something truly important. As she prepared herself for the most dangerous dinner of her life, she realized something else. Escobar hadn't just won. He had achieved what no one else ever had. He had captured her full attention. And if she were honest with herself, her respect, too. That night, as a helicopter lifted off above the city lights heading toward Hacienda Napoles, Sophia gazed at the moonlit mountains below. Somewhere in those vast lands, the most powerful man in the country was waiting for her. For a dinner that would not only determine the fate of her company, but perhaps alter the course of her entire life. Pablo Escobar had promised an unforgettable response to her public snub, and he delivered. He didn't resort to violence, direct threats, or the fear for which he was notorious. Instead, he orchestrated a display of power so polished, so meticulously crafted, that it achieved the unthinkable. He earned her respect. When a helicopter landed at Hacienda Napoles and she saw him standing there, wearing a flawless tuxedo beside an artificial lake where flamingos wandered beneath soft lights, she finally understood the scope of the man she had dared to defy. His answer to rejection wasn't brutal. It was masterful. And as she walked toward him, knowing that each step pulled her further from the world she once knew and closer to an entirely new universe, Sofia Herrera realized that Pablo Escobar hadn't just taken revenge. He had won her admiration. The smile he offered her as he extended his arm to escort her to dinner by the Hippo Lake would remain etched in her memory. It was the smile of a man who had risked everything on a brilliant move and had won. Not just a game, but the most valuable prize of all. The mind and heart of the only woman who had ever dared to challenge him. That dinner at Hacienda Napoles lasted until sunrise. And when Sofia returned to Medellin, she was no longer the same woman. Pablo Escobar had achieved the impossible. He had conquered Medellin's elite not through force, but with the most refined display of power the country had ever witnessed. His response to Sofia's rejection became legendary, not for its cruelty, but for its sophistication. And years later, when historians recount the rise of Pablo Escobar, this story will be remembered as the moment when the cocaine baron proved that his true power didn't lie in guns or money, but in his unmatched ability to read the human soul and bend it to his will. The woman who once dared to publicly scorn him became his most intimate victory. And that tale will be told time and time again within Colombia's inner circles of influence, where everyone learned one fundamental truth. Never underestimate Pablo Escobar. His revenge will always be more brilliant, more unexpected, and more devastating than anyone could imagine. Can you believe he managed to win over the woman who humiliated him without firing a single bullet? This story reveals that true power isn't always wielded through violence, but through strategy. But the real question still hangs in the air. Was Pablo a master manipulator, or simply an obsessor with no limits? And you? Would you have resisted longer than Sofia, or given in from the start? And if you were Escobar, would you have had the patience to carry out such a complex plan purely out of pride? This story divides opinion. Some see it as a civilized demonstration of dominance. Others, a chilling act of manipulation. If this story made you think about power and resistance, stick with us for more narratives that challenge what you thought you knew. Subscribe, because even more shocking stories are on the way. Did you know Escobar once blackmailed a president over a bicycle? Or that a woman outsmarted him for years, shaking his empire to the core? Hit like if you think Sofia was brave or naive. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that sometimes reality is far stranger than fiction. And tell us in the comments, do you think Sofia truly fell for Pablo, or just did what she had to do to survive? Because Colombia's most astonishing stories are just getting started.